afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast State of the Balance video. Yes, indeed, it's that time of the month where I make a video about my thoughts on the state of the balance as I perceive it, so people won't ask me about it elsewhere. Because it gets a bit tiring when I have to answer it to 20 people and then explain that again and again and again. So, off here to... well, just some battle I'm running in the background, of course. I mean, I'll be taking the usual role, which is usually, you know, Americans, Soviets, Wehrmacht, Oberkommando West. So, how are things sort of developed after that big patch, which we finally got here in the beginning of September? How have things turned? For the Americans, overall, strategically, not an awful lot has actually changed. There were some sort of minor changes here and there. The BAR became, well, not so good. Price cost, otherwise, it didn't really follow off there, and I think that's something that could be done well. I still think the bazooka also needs to be a bit cheaper. I mean, overall, moving them down to 50, maybe 45 munitions overall would be a good move, and thus making them a bit more useful in numbers, since the Americans were all about, you know, weapons in numbers, not necessarily having the best weapons. So that might be something there to consider. In that regard, you know, I mean, the lieutenant, the captain, that way because became a less potent, and of course, I mean, that's in some regards nice, but in terms of extent, I mean, it might take a bit of adaptation there for the Americans to sort of, you know, get around that, in particular since the lieutenant was quite handy previously. But still, you know, making the bazooka and the BAR a bit cheaper might still be a good idea in that regard. The American mortar half-track, still, well, kinda rubbish. I still think it needs a bit of a boost to sort of be a bit more useful. I mean, overall, it tends to not actually do a lot, which, you know, might call for some slight fixes in that department, if you will. But overall, I mean, it's largely same old, same old. I mean, some doctrines seen little less uses. Mechanized, I mean, the mechanized half-track assault group, for example, I mean, overall, those groups they could do with being a bit cheap, I think. I mean, I do think they're a bit overcosted all in general, considering what you get and how they're supposed to be used. So that might also be a little thing to consider there. So, I mean, that's rather it. For the Soviets, I mean, again, not an awful lot has changed. I mean, besides a few sort of outliers, like Red Wings, who like to use the H-76, I mean, it's pretty much all, you know, let's go for heavy doctrinal armor, or T-30-45s, and stop our opponents with a bit of elite infantry. I mean, overall, not a lot has changed. I mean, Wehrmacht players have gotten better sort of dealing with it, which certainly throws a lot of them more off track, but beyond that, I mean, conscripts are a bit easier to deal with than this overpowering. They still do more damage, though, in a sense, but, you know, it's less, you know, head-on, mindless assaults at the enemy, and you just, death. So, I mean, that's nice, but overall, strategically, I mean, they mostly still play the same games. I mean, you know, Collins could maybe still do with a look at. The H-6 still could also maybe do with a bit of a look at in some regard, you know. Maybe improving its AoE and slightly decreasing its range so it doesn't come too overpowering, but beyond that, I mean, not so much I would say. Otherwise, I think it's just a matter about Serbs maybe adapting to things as they change, in particular to the newer Wehrmacht play, which has gotten more interesting. I mean, in that regard, I think really the Wehrmacht was the big winner with the previous patch here. In that regard, I mean, it didn't necessarily get a ton of huge buffs. In fact, I mean, there was a few there. Of course, it got new doctrine, which is also neat, but I mean, for example, I mean, just the fact that conscripts became a little less overpowering directly, the grenadiers got a small buff, right from a small nerf, you know, BLs also sort of fixed out. I mean, it made things a little bit more survivable early on. Panzergrenadiers also getting a lot more viable, also then open up for more options. That's generally also what I sort of, you know, want to see. It's what I like, it's what I also think makes things a bit better, a bit more interesting. So, I mean, when that happens, you know, I think all things improve, and that's rather what's happened for the Wehrmacht. They've got more options now, so they stand a bit better chances of sort of dealing with their opponent. They're less sort of easily thrown off. I mean, they're not all of a sudden overpowering either, but, you know, they're less of a pushover early on. That also makes things a bit more interesting later on, particularly because now the Panther and the Sturmpanzer IV have been buffed a bit. They suddenly have a bit more punch, or can absorb a bit more of a punch, which also suddenly make Tier 4, you know, more interesting. In fact, I mean, in the last couple of days, I've probably seen a lot more Panthers than I have seen in the last 6 months. I mean, that really ought to say something about the state of Wehrmacht Tier 4. I mean, after 6 months where it was largely only, you know, Tigers, Panzer IV spam, maybe with a few Stooks, well, besides me, that is, I mean, you know, things were getting pretty stale and dying in that department. But now with Wehrmacht Tier 4 all of a sudden a bit more interesting, I think, you know, we might also see the play versus the other two factions in those cases getting a lot more interesting as well. So in that regard, you know, I think the Wehrmacht really was the big winner, because again, it got a lot more options, which is generally what I want. And there are, of course, those who like to say I'm biased, you know, towards Axis, and I'm a fanboy and all that, and they sort of, you know, ignore one tiny little bit of the point, which is, you know, I'm biased towards one thing even more, and that's interesting gameplay when I run this channel. There's nothing in having in just seeing the same, well, pardon my language, but shit all over again and again and again. I want to see different gameplay. And, you know, I mean, that's what we might actually get now from the Wehrmacht, which is great. Of course, we all now just see Panther spam, you know, clearly something wrong in that then need to be fixed. But, you know, overall, I'm reasonably positive, because now the Wehrmacht, besides being more fun to play, is also going to be a lot more fun to look at and cast. It's also going to be a lot more unpredictable, which also makes it more fun, because, again, the problem was a bit previously. It tends to be, oh, he's getting a tiger. Well, best set up the tiger traps, lads. So in that regard, you know, it's going to get a bit more meaty, I think a bit more interesting. I mean, it's probably not going to happen overnight, but, you know, I'm seeing signs that things are going to be interesting, so, you know, if that's good, that is what I like to see. Again, also that Panzer goes to be more viable. Stormtrooper is also a cool, neat addition alongside Close the Pocket, and overall, I mean, you know, more options, better. Looking at the Oberkommando West, of course, they have become rather maligned as of late due to the Kubelwagen, well, buff, amongst other things, and, well, as some of you might have remembered, I did point out early on in the whole Western Front Armies, you know, state, and when it was released, you know, that was going to be one of those units going to cause a lot of problems. Either it's going to be too bad, or it's going to be too good, and currently we're in that state where it's called too good, because again it's a highly mobile suppressive weapon, and that's basically the headache. I mean, currently now with a bit more range, it'll all of a sudden become a lot more better, in particular also with increased suppression due to some other fun things. I mean, that rather makes it an utter pain in the arse to deal with. And combined with truck pushing, which still hasn't been sorted out, I mean, you know, the Oberkommando West, yeah, a lot of more pain in the arse. I mean, overall, besides that, it's not actually caused a lot of changes. I mean, Panthers become more viable, but, you know, otherwise it's Pumas, it's Stukas, Fuses. I mean, it's just basically sticking to the same few units, rushing for Panzerfusiliers or Fallschirmjäger, maybe Obersoldaten, but overall just the same sort of, you know, spammy strategies or tactics, slightly gimmicky. Not a lot of fun to sort of watch in the longer run, or, you know, again, I mean, play with, because, you know, there's just not a lot of options that are sort of really working. I mean, the Yak Panzer IV is a bit, you know, rubbish. The looks so easily cleared out. I mean, if you get it rushed out early on, but again, that's sort of the part, I mean, you almost have to rush. And again, that's sort of the pain in the arse. Pardon my language again. I mean, the Oberkommando doesn't really have a lot of, you know, actual viable options. And again, it's due to that part again where I have to say at the core of it, it's rather, you know, a flawed design. It's the unit design that does not cohere with the whole sort of army design. I mean, for something supposed to be elite, we're seeing someone, you know, army that throws, you know, infantry easily at the enemy. We've got the cheapest infantry in the game, almost, you know, non-doctrinal, which will lead to some rather sad tactics and strategy for something that's supposed to be elite. The armor's doesn't really feel up to it either. I mean, that's really, I think the problem is the unit design not really cohering with the army design. As long as that's the case, you know, it's going to be a pain in the arse where either, you know, it's not really working, or again, it's working too good. And I really do personally think the Oberkommando West is in need of a overhaul. Volksgrenadiers, Jagd Panzer IV, the infrared half-track could just as well, you know, be taken out in the backyard and shot, for all I care. But, you know, just overhaul it. I mean, again, give those units a rethink, because currently it's just not working. I mean, doctrinally we're going to be pretty much seeing only Luftwaffe most of the time, occasionally Breakthrough, where we only see Panzerfusiliers, because no one will use as much else, and occasionally also special operations for the grenades. The Jaeger infantry stop, you know, being used, which, I mean, you know, can be interpreted in some ways. I mean, they're certainly not quite as powerful, but then again, you know, when the other options are much better, you know, well, what's the point of going for them as well? And of course, there might be something to be looked into there, but again, also something just to look into what's currently available. I mean, I just don't really think it's working out very well overall, and it's certainly not something frightfully fun, which also is a bit of a problem when you're pretty much in army that largely just plays the same few things over and over again, to a point where you might make the Soviets, you know, look completely varied in comparison. So, I mean, I really think that's where a lot of efforts need to be focused, in basically overhauling the Oberkommando West. And, you know, giving a lot of those units a serious rethink, and also realizing what does elite mean, because elite does not mean Soviet-style tactics, because again, that's what we often currently, at least I often currently see with the Oberkommando West. Rush and Soviet-style strategies and tactics, not, small units are powerful. Sure, to a certain extent they're powerful, but then they also sort of get absurd when they hit Veteran 2.5. I mean, it's a bit awkward. It's a bit weird, and overall it's just not fun, which overall is really what matters to me. Also that it fits historically to a certain extent. I mean, I'm not expecting perfect historical accuracy, but, when the Volkskanzler is, to a certain extent, have more in common with Volkssturm, and then all of a sudden at Veteran 2.5 they can soak up more bullets than the Shock Trooper squad, something's not quite adding up. So again, I mean, that's rather my thoughts in terms of the state of the balance. I mean, again, to a certain extent, it's probably what I've said about the Overcommandos. It's just a repeat of some of the stuff more or less in different ways set these last few months. But again, I will say it again, it needs a rethink. Units needs to be overhauled. Otherwise, I mean, we're just going to go from one mess to the other, because ultimately, when the core issues aren't sorted, I mean, just fixing the superficial issues will just cause new ones to spring out. It's going to be basically like dealing with a Hydra. You cut off one head, two more appear. But overall, I mean, again, from the Wehrmacht perspective, good. From the American perspective, some small changes still needed, but looking close to be good. Soviets, some other things could also do with some tweaking here and there. And call-ins, again, could also do with being looked at, but for the Wehrmacht overall, it's the positive thing. For the Oberkommando West, again, it's just that huge overhaul. Again, I've been more or less been asking for some time now. So, I mean, there you go. And again, my sorry again for sort of being a bit more, polemic and ranting on the Oberkommando West, but I just find them to be a disappointment. I really, 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 really want to love the Oberkommando West. I mean, it's a cool German army. It's got a lot of cool ideas. It's got, in theory, Volkskanzler, but in the end, I mean, for someone like me, it's just a disappointment. I mean, I find the Wehrmacht much more enjoyable and much closer to an actual German army concepts, whereas the Oberkommando West is about as close to that as the Soviet army at this stage. So, I mean, that's something to consider. So anyways, I mean, thanks for listening. Hopefully this might give you an idea on some thoughts here, some ideas, or, something to argue about, scream at, and call me all sorts of fun and lovely things. I mean, if you enjoyed it, if you learned something, or you just agree with this, fine, that's lovely. Subscribe, share with friends, tell everybody, show it to Relic, tell them, fix the Oberkommando West, Dane said so. And I really think he's occasionally a clever guy, or whatever, just tell me to shut up. And I'm a fanboy if you disagree, which seems to be the most common counter-argument, fascinatingly enough. Anyways, though, hopefully this has given some food for thought for some discussions, and again, might, lead to something positive, which is overall what I want, and overall all I want for Companies 2 is to see something exciting and varied every day. That's really sort of the point of these things, and also I'm sort of trying to also, give my thoughts on how to achieve through state of the balance, that is making as many options as possible and strategies as possible, viable. So I mean, that's rather it. So anyways, thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.